I'm absolutely delighted to welcome today Helen Taylor-Boyd. And Helen and I have been friends for a long time, and she's been one of our longest standing volunteers and is now actually on the board of Bats Without Borders. So Helen is an ecologist and a conservationist, and she has a particular soft spot for bats being her main interest, particularly behaviour and landscape ecology. She started up the Bats in Zambia project, which was very kindly supported by the Rufford Foundation and Bats Without Borders to help improve research, public engagement and capacity strengthening in Zambia. She's currently finishing her part-time PhD on bats in an agricultural landscape at the University of Stirling in Scotland, with extensive research. Obviously, her fieldwork is all across Zambia, her home country. And she will continue to develop the Bats in Zambia project activities as she progresses through the next steps of her career. So I'm going to hand over to Helen.
Thank you very much, Rachel. That's lovely. So yes, what a lovely introduction, and basically says everything about me that I need to say myself, apart from the fact that I'm absolutely a super fan of Bats Without Borders. So obviously, like Rachel said, been volunteering for quite a while for Bats Without Borders, and now on the board, really excited. And obviously the Bats in Zambia project comes under the Bats Without Borders umbrella. So I will go straight in to the talk.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
And there's no boxes in front of anything, is there?
No, it's all clear.
Okay, and I'm going to actually stop my video if that's okay. I'll restart it at the end. Basically, I understand that the video covers some of the talk, so I will remove that for now. So yes, we're at the stage now with the Bats in Zambia project where we need to start thinking about where we go in future. And of course, we need to use the experience that we've had from the past and what we're doing now to inform those decisions. Like I said, Bats in Zambia is a project that comes under Bats Without Borders. Like Rachel said, some of you in the audience may have been following these webinars for quite a long time, and you will have noticed that I did give a presentation about the Bats in Zambia project as part of overall bat conservation in Zambia talk in 2020. So you can go back and look at that on YouTube. So a lot of the information about our past activities and the context in general for the project is there if you wanted to have a look back. So when we first started, I have to say that I felt like we were a tiny drop in the ocean. Zambia is a very large country in general, with a lot of different habitats and a lot of different bat species, so over 80 species of bats that we know of for the moment. And so there was obviously a lot of work to be done, especially given that there wasn't very much information about bats built up from the past, apart from maybe museum specimen information, for example. So there was a lot of work to do. And I personally, I think I felt a little bit overwhelmed. I was doing my PhD at the time in terms of field work, and it felt like a lot of work to do for just one or two people, a few people basically. But we had so many ideas, so much passion, so much interest in bats that basically we were trying to do everything all at once. So a lot of education activities, visiting people who had bats in their houses, trying to start up a bat box scheme, taking in rescued bats, doing obviously research activities, like I said, with my PhD work, also trying to do a lot of training to try and increase capacity and a general public awareness, building up citizen science work. And of course, the ultimate goal for us was to influence policy so that in future bats are protected in a much more significant way. And starting off with that was really difficult, but building the connections between lots of different people has been really important. And at this point, I just want to acknowledge all of the people who've been involved so far. All of our collaborations, the funding, Rachel mentioned the Rufford Foundation, Idea Wild as well, and then also people who've supported with helping our equipment, stocks and repairs, particularly Wildlife Acoustics, Bird's Eye View, those sorts of organisations, and in-country collaborations as well. Universities like University of Zambia and Copperbelt University have been really supportive, and of course the Department of National Parks and Wildlife. But just as important, all of the people who've supported privately, landowners, roost owners, schools, environmental education centres, safari and conservation organisations, and just individual volunteers and private people who've donated. So this has been a massive collaborative effort. And like I said, the relationships that we've built up over the years, I think, have built a solid foundation for us. So maybe what we were, our ambitions weren't so badly founded, because we've managed to build up enough backup to be able to continue ahead, we hope. So at the time, my focus was very much based on my research that I was doing for my PhD, but also we started to get a lot of calls about bats being in people's houses, and we had to address the significant human-bat conflict as it came in. So in terms of our research activities, this was very important for us as well. And so roost visits became really a big focus of the public engagement activities that we were doing. Now, we were slightly interrupted in terms of field work because of COVID. It meant that not only were we being careful about doing field work, being exposed to other people, but actually we were trying to also protect the bats themselves from this potential threat. And so it is something that did impact our practical work, but actually, as you'll see, we were still able to maintain communication with the general public and with our collaborators as well, everybody we worked with. And our main channel for this, amazingly, was our Facebook group. So we've got at the moment about 1,000, just over 1,000 members on this Facebook group. We kept it as a group rather than a page, so that we were a bit more interactive. We do control some of the content that goes on to that, because obviously we don't want anything that is inappropriate. So we do screen members and also the content that goes on to that. But you can see from this plot here that we actually have quite a good balance of age groups and also of genders as well. The younger age group between 18 and 24, that's something that maybe we can work on, and then the older generations as well, something that we can work on. But that mid-range of people is pretty well represented, I think. So when we look at the countries that people come from on our group, it's really, really encouraging to see that the vast majority come from Zambia. And that's basically our target audience for sharing information, but also gathering information, and for individuals to also share information between themselves as well. It's really, really encouraging to see that. And when we look at the places within Zambia that people come from, top, not really surprising, Lusaka, the capital city, but we've also got some Copperbelt cities as well, Kitwe-Ndola, Chingola. So some of the more significant cities in the country, and then some of the sort of less well-known areas as well. We've got a few representatives from there. So quite encouraging, but obviously there's some areas that we do need to work on promoting bats too. And another area that we wanted to focus on was making sure that we're there for people like students who want to do projects on bats, but also training for individuals who are supervising their students, and other organizations as well that might need training on how to study bats. So recently we've done the Bat Acoustics for Academics course, supported by the Paul Bates at Harrison Institute, and we've supported several students at different organizations, different universities, mainly at the University of Zambia, supervised by Dr. Katendi Changula, who's a long-term friend of mine and really enthusiastic about bats, although her specialism is in virology. And another area we wanted to focus on to promote bats to people and also get feedback on bats is, and perspectives of bats, we wanted to focus on events. They're really good for public engagement, especially things like the careers fair that's run in Lusaka every year. It's building up year on year, the Conservation Careers Fair. We did it last year, we did it this year again. I wasn't present at the one this year, and it was so exciting to see the feedback that came back from the two people who have recently undergone training to do these sorts of events, Kapembwa and Bernard. They were so enthusiastic, and it's really great to see the next generation doing these sorts of events through the project. Another tiny little thing, I just need to give a quick shout out to my mum, who's worked on a little bat booklet with me. She is a fantastic artist, in my opinion. And this little booklet gives people a basic overview about the bats that are in Zambia, how to get more information, who to contact if they find bats or want to know more. So this is something that we started doing as part of the last funding that we got from Rufford Foundation, and it's been a really, really useful little booklet for us to hand out. So that's a little bit about what we've done in the past, and like I said, in the past we've talked about these projects within the Bats in Zambia project, and we want to really decide where we go from here. So at this stage, obviously we've focused mainly on the research driven evidence collecting for information to go onto our outreach activities and our training activities. One of the reasons why I wanted to give this talk actually was because I attended a learning event in Namibia recently, again funded and organized by the Rufford Foundation and Rachel, who's hosting this webinar. It was absolutely fantastic in my opinion, and also as part of that I helped Rachel run a monitoring and evaluation workshop, which I believe was very, very popular. And I personally not only enjoyed delivering it, but also took a lot out of it. And I thought, well, actually, I better do what I'm actually preaching out there. And I thought, well, actually, we need to really review where we're up to and where we fit in the bigger picture with bat conservation in general, but also in a Zambian context. So at this sort of review stage where we think about who we are at the moment and where we fit in, the first question I had to ask myself as a project coordinator was, are we actually getting to the stage where we need to be registering as an organization, as an NGO or something? But we're actually not, we don't have paid staff. We have the wonderful Bats Without Borders as an umbrella to be able to support and coordinate the projects that are under the Bats in Zambia project. And so I don't believe that we are actually an organization. Are we a bat group? Now, those of you who are in the batty world already might know about bat groups as being sort of localized groups of individuals coming together, wanting to do great things for bat conservation, and very much driving the activities based on the individual people's interests. And that is an absolutely fantastic model. For example, in the UK, there's lots of bat groups in different areas of the country, and they coordinate on certain projects, but they also do their very localized projects as well. And Bats Without Borders has recently, like I said, trained some individuals to run bat groups or to develop bat groups. And it has been really, really successful as a training exercise. And within Zambia, we've got quite a few people who actually attended that and want to set up bat groups. Those are, like I said, are generally localized groups that come together. And so Bats in Zambia as a project has a country-wide remit. So I don't think that we are a bat group, but maybe we are better at coordinating or helping those bat groups to work together in the future. So does that mean that actually we're maybe more of a network? But again, I don't think we quite fit into that description, because we're doing lots of practical work, practical research, as well as sort of coordinating and putting people together. So to answer the question of who are we, and where do we fit in, we need to go back a little bit and think about what do we do best. And I personally think that actually our biggest impact has been passing on information, collecting information, collating that information, and collaborating with other individuals to put all of this information together to communicate to various people, stakeholders, the general public, but also organizations working with bats, and policymakers or enforcers. So actually what I see our role as being is more of a hub of information, where we sort of collect information and pass it out to the different stakeholders. As I mentioned, we've got things like institutions, our universities, environmental education centres, schools, we've got landowners, we've also got people who are developing or enforcing policy, like the National Parks and Wildlife Department and the Environment Management Agency in Zambia. We also need to give information to professional ecologists who are doing impact assessments, let's say. There's, of course, the general public, and there are the bat groups that are more recently, hopefully, being set up. But this isn't quite right. I do actually think the information flow goes both ways, but also goes between these different stakeholders. So it becomes more of a sort of an even flow across the different stakeholders and between us and everybody else. So I don't see that we have to fit into anything that's particularly established right now. And this may be a dilemma that other people who are developing projects in less well-studied and understood areas might actually find useful. So this is why I wanted to talk about this today. So like I said, I believe we could probably describe ourselves more as a hub of information. And this is what I wanted to take forward into our future activities. So where do we go from here? If we are a hub of information, we need really to think about what information do we need and what information needs to be passed on. And to look at that, we need to think about what information people are passing to us in the first place. So the two main queries that we've received through the Facebook group, through direct contact, all of those sorts of avenues, is how do I get rid of the bats that are in my house? For example, this is quite a common issue worldwide. Bats get into people's living spaces. In Zambia, we've got a particular issue with molossid or free-tailed species, which build up into quite big numbers, and they can be quite disturbing for people in their houses. I can't lie. I absolutely love molosids. They are one of my favorite groups of bat species, especially because they're so important for agricultural landscapes, which is what I mainly study. But I do understand that it can be difficult when you've got to share your house with thousands and thousands of bats. So this is an issue that we need to think about. And then we've got people who say to us, well, actually, I've got a farm. You tell me that bats are really important to eat crop pests. Well, then how do I attract them to my farm? And for these two questions, we need to take a much more sort of evidence-based approach to be able to answer. We've got lots of experience with bats abroad in different countries all over the world that has built up in terms of humane exclusions, for example, when we're talking about bats in people's houses. But also with farm landscapes, the information that is out there is a lot more comprehensive. But we don't really have enough information about our Zambian bats to be able to answer these questions definitively, especially in the context of removing bats from people's houses where there's a lot of big gaps that are very, very difficult to close up. So these two questions we wanted to use to drive our further activities. And the obvious answer to both of these questions based on information from other countries, is bat boxes, artificial roosts. Now, these are not suitable for every bat species. There are many bat species who will not use bat boxes, but they are potentially useful for exclusions from people's houses, for example, especially in terms of molluskids. And they are also potentially a useful attractor of certain bat species to farm landscapes. These bat boxes still need to be tested within the country, and we need to understand whether bats will be using these on a larger scale, or is it more important? Well, I'm sure it's more important to protect natural roosts, but as we start to lose habitat on a much larger scale with human population increases, then we do need to start thinking about the alternatives and whether these alternatives might work to help maintain our bat populations, at least for some species, and the ecosystem services that they provide in both natural and anthropogenic landscapes. And so when we look at the next activity that we wanted to focus on, the collation of information, there's still a very important need for a central deposit of information. So one focus is an acoustic library, so collecting bat call recordings that people can use to inform their own research, especially with student projects and people needing a baseline of acoustic calls to be able to identify the species that they are recording in a non-invasive acoustic way. There's also citizen science that we want to focus on. People who found bats in their houses, people who found grounded bats, for example, or even dead bats. We need to collect that information so we have a good set of records about where different species are found across the country. And obviously, we would like to incorporate researchers' records as well into the bigger database of bat records throughout Zambia. And of course, I have gone on about this a lot, but the collaborations that we've developed have been really, really important in doing the work that we do, but also going forward, they're going to be really essential in building up the activities for the future. We now have a capacity development officer for Bats Without Borders. I believe Christopher is within the webinar today, which is really lovely. And since he started more recently, he's been extremely supportive of the Bats in Zambia project as a whole. Obviously, there are other projects that Bats Without Borders is developing alongside the Bats in Zambia project. For example, copperbelt bats, which is very much focusing on human-bat interactions within that region. But he's been really, really supportive in talking through the process of evaluating where we're up to with the Bats in Zambia project and thinking about how we go forward with that. And we need to develop a better capacity to be able to do the work that we do. Like I said, when I first started developing the project, I felt very, very overwhelmed. I don't feel like that anymore. The collaborators and also the individuals who've become involved in the project have basically made me feel like we can achieve so much more, and there is so much that I can sort of hand over. And the bat groups is one avenue for handing over a lot of the activities that previously we felt that we needed to cover. A lot of the outreach, a lot of the events, education activities, for example, the people who are building up the bat groups are really interested in this sort of area. So it's something that we can pass on to collaborators like the bat groups. There's the universities. I think that research can be done extremely well by building up a good set of student projects which can be put together into a long-term sort of monitoring or long-term study situation. And so universities, I think, going forward are going to be extremely important collaborators in developing the Bats in Zambia project. There are also farms, of course. I've mentioned the fact that there are a lot of farmers who want to attract bats to their farms, and we want to understand how bats are using the landscapes much better. So it's important to keep these contacts open. And of course, national parks, who are also really interested in the general biodiversity within their parks and management plans going forward. So bats are a really important part of biodiversity. And many of you will know about Kasanka National Park in Zambia, where the straw-coloured fruit bat migration happens every year. And it's not just about the straw-coloured fruit bats at Kasanka. There are many, many other species that we need to understand. And so collaborations with national parks are really important. The communication aspect of the work that we want to do going forward will basically involve what we're doing already, but with a much more driven focus. So, for example, the social media outlets in terms of the Facebook group will be maintained and really, really important, I think, given the amount of impact that we've had through that channel. There's also a plan to do more and more training. Now, this is training mainly to do with non-invasive techniques to research bats, or to just be interested in bats in terms of recording bat calls and listening to bat calls. There's also workshops in general to deliver to different collaborators, different stakeholders, which will enable them to do their work better. And events like the Conservation Careers Fair that has recently taken place and we've attended a few times. So that basically brings me to the end of our time travel journey. We've gone from thinking about the past and how that might inform what we've ended up doing in the present, and what we need to be doing in the future. There has been a lot of activities at the very beginning that we felt that we needed to cover, and we've been able to hone those down now to prioritize what we want to do in the future, and also feel that we don't really have an identity crisis anymore. We are who we are, and we will develop into whatever is needed by the Zambian bat community at the time. For the present, like I said, I feel like we are a central hub of information, and we see that happening in the foreseeable future, but who knows what comes next. So yes, thank you very much, everybody, for attending today. I hope it's been useful, not only in understanding our personal journey in terms of a group, but also for those of you who might be having similar dilemmas about what you want to be or what you want to do in the future. So if you've got any questions, I'm absolutely happy to take those now, or you can email us as well.
Thank you very much, Helen, for the whistle-stop tour of present and future work and past. So if anybody would like to raise your hand, feel free to do so, and you can ask your question, or else if you would prefer to pop it in the chat, I can read the questions out to Helen, so don't be shy. So while we're doing that, Helen, I will start with a question for you. I was just wondering, have you found, I mean, I think most of the time, kind of farmers and land managers are probably quite an open door, but have you found any difficulty with sort of bats and farm conflict with some of the work that you've been doing?
Good question. Actually, so far, like you say, most farmers, especially when we're dealing with insectivorous bats, have been very, very enthusiastic. As soon as you say that bats are really important as pest control, then they are so receptive to talking about bats. There are the odd farmers who will say, oh, we go round batting them in the house, but that's more of a sort of conflict within a sort of domestic situation. Overall, most people are generally honest about their attitudes towards bats. That being said, I do think that people often have an issue with fruit bats, and in a farming landscape, this can be a tricky conversation, especially when someone is upset that they've lost some mangoes or guavas to fruit bats. There are issues with this on a sort of smaller scale. However, in future, I foresee a much bigger issue, and I have spoken to a few people about this, because fruit farming, and especially nut farming, avocado farming, is actually becoming much more popular in Zambia. Like I said, I think it might be a conflict issue that might come up in the future. It is important that we learn from other people's experiences. For example, people in Mauritius have this issue of human-bat conflict in orchards. And so it is something that we're looking at in future. But at the moment, touch wood, we seem to be having a really lovely time with farmers who are really receptive to our ideas.
Fantastic. That's great. That's what we like to hear. So I've got a question from Sue saying, thanks. I was wondering what were the general attitudes towards bats and their position in the culture where you started?
Okay, that's an interesting question, and actually is pivotal to all the work that we do. So in terms of direct understanding of bats, I think that people have very limited knowledge about what bats are, where they are, what role they have in ecosystems, for example. And there are myths surrounding bats. For example, there might be some witchcraft myths. There's the classic bats will come into my hair, or they will latch onto me and they'll never come off, and they need to be surgically removed. Those sorts of myths that are quite common to other regions around the world, and something that we often have to talk to people about. I think different communities have different myths based on their cultures. But overall, I think that people are generally indifferent to bats. Unless they have a specific interaction with a bat, let's say bats in their houses, then generally people are indifferent. They are inquisitive, and when you talk about bats, they want to explain all of the myths that they have heard about bats. It's very, very interesting. But we don't have the issue, a massive issue with people eating bats, for example. So we don't have that issue. So we don't have to think about that perspective, except for in certain areas along the sort of northern borders where the issue has actually more recently come up. And Christopher will be working on the Copperbelt Bat project, which may involve more of that issue. When we talk about the Copperbelt bats, where we've got the straw-coloured fruit bat migration coming to that area, that creates an area where people have a more negative outlook on bats, because they are so many in one concentration in people's gardens, for example, and along the roadside. So yeah, to give you a basic response, most people are indifferent, but when they come into direct contact or where there's bats in huge numbers, then that starts to influence their outlook on bats. But we do need to do more study in that area on a sort of more evidence-based way, social science sort of way, which Christopher and his team will be doing.
Thank you very much. So we've got another good question from Luxon saying, is there any negative impact toward bats from large-scale farming? And I must say this is quite a worry, I feel. Yeah.
Yeah, so basically this was the basis for my PhD. Partly it was about, do we know if bats are eating crop pests? The answer to that from my PhD research, although not published yet, is yes, they are eating crop pests. What is the impact of bats on, of large-scale farming, especially big commercial farms with big center pivot irrigations where there's large-scale clearance of woodland, for example, and natural habitat? Is there a big impact on bat activity? And for that particular question, the different species may be impacted in different ways. There may be some species that actually take advantage of these big open landscapes that are created on big commercial farms. But in terms of overall diversity of bat species, I believe it definitely reduces diversity and reduces habitat for many types of species. There is a lot more work we need to do. I think habitat loss in terms of large-scale farming is a big issue for biodiversity in general. I don't think it's any different to bats. Like I said, there'll be those species that really love those landscapes, but overall, I think we're talking biodiversity loss. Yes, need more research though.
Great, thank you very much. And so Claire was asked a question: are you producing bat boxes that are available for sale within Zambia for those who would like to try one?
Really good question. So we've actually had a lot of individuals as well as farmers who have come to us and said, right, we need loads of bat boxes. Can you make them for us? Our capacity so far has been absolutely limited. And my husband, Danny, is amazing at woodwork, and he's been making bat boxes with some of our volunteers for a while, but only on a very sort of small scale, on request sort of basis. And so some farmers, for example, in Mukushi requested some, and we were able to put up a little bit of a markup to be able to get some funds that go towards the work that we're doing. This is definitely an individual by individual basis at the moment. And actually going forward, we've always said to people, you know, we can give you designs and you should make them. Usually, to my knowledge, most of that fizzles out and people don't actually go ahead and make their own bat boxes or get them made by a carpenter. So I think going forward, we really need to, there is a need for this. But the problem is we haven't actually tested how well bat boxes work for Zambian bats. So that's part of the future research work that we want to do. And we've got a couple of farmers really interested in testing bat boxes and who might actually go ahead and fund some of the bat box manufacture for the projects going forward. It's in the pipeline. It's not quite up and ready yet. In terms of commercial sort of production, we still have to build capacity for that. So yes, watch this space.
And actually, that's a very nice segue into the next question, because Stephanie was asking, with skepticism from Crawford et al. Concerning bat boxes, could you talk about your success with bat boxes, especially in the tropical climates, please? And I'm guessing that's also to do with, I know that there's certainly for European species, which are very much, you know, tree dwelling, is actually kind of creating, you know, actually more, I suppose, cracks and different features in actual trees. But obviously we're looking at quite a different set of species. So yeah, so if you would like to comment on that, please, Helen.
Is absolutely the foundation for the research, the collection of data that we want to go ahead forward with, is that actually we don't know enough about our Zambian species to understand fully what types of bat boxes might be good for certain species, and also if we attract those types of species, are we sort of removing opportunities for other types of species, let's say woodland species, like Rachel said, who might be better off having an artificial roost that's designed more like a tree. So this is, like I said, information that we need to gather on a localized scale. But that being said, the two issues that have been highlighted by the two public questions, the one where we're talking about exclusions and the one where we're talking about agricultural landscapes, like I said, what we're finding is mostly molluskids in people's houses, or the free-tailed bats in people's houses, that we need to exclude. And we also are finding the issue, the bats that are most common on agricultural landscapes and maybe more useful in providing pest control services. Obviously, this is something that we need to study more, but they are also the free-tailed bats. So the target for understanding bat boxes would be this group of species, which we, from exclusions, we've known to move from the house into the bat boxes that we've made. So from the surface, we think that for exclusion purposes, those bat boxes would be very, very useful. Again, we really need more opportunities to test these theories. And, you know, basically what we're trying to avoid is if you do a humane exclusion, the bats just move to somewhere else where they're just going to be poisoned or killed on a large scale. So by providing an alternative roost, that would be the ideal where they don't leave the premises, but they do leave the living spaces of the person that has called us. So I think in that context, it's something important to go ahead with. In terms of agricultural landscapes, again, we're talking free-tailed bats and creating roost opportunities for them to see if those will attract the bats to forage on the landscape as well. Again, the bat box designs that we're looking at is targeted at those, but we need to do the research to see, by providing these roosts, does it help to attract the bats, and does it actually allow increased foraging, not just increased roosting opportunities. I realized the focus of your question was looking mainly at the broader spectrum of species and the issue of other types of artificial roosts that we could explore. I think that's something that we would like to take forward based on the research that we come up with on these bat boxes. Sorry for the long-winded answer to that, but I hope that was useful.
No, that's great. Thanks, Helen. No, we've got loads of time for questions, so this is fantastic. So you've got quite a few little questions coming up here as well. So Sue has another question saying, is heat stress a problem for Zambian megabats?
Ooh, megabats. So when we're talking about megabats, we're mainly concerned with obviously our fruit bats, Pteropodidae. We have a range of fruit bat species in Zambia. In terms of adaptations to heat, I think we've got a range of habitats across Zambia. So we have much more hotter regions, mainly to the south, wetter, cooler regions to the north, and more forested areas. Woodland, Mayombe woodland is generally around the country, but you've got the wetter Mayombe woodland further north. And so I think different species do better in these different habitats. We don't have issues in the same way as something like Australia, for example. We generally don't have extreme heat events. We do have bushfires, things like that, but there's generally other habitats that these bats can fly to. We do have bats that are resident all year round, and then we've got the straw-coloured fruit bats that also come to the country through the migration every year. But that's mainly in the rainy season. Heat is generally not a big issue then. So dry season, in terms of heat stress, in the same way as somewhere like Australia, we haven't really observed this, but it is something that we haven't really focused on studying. I don't think anybody's really looked into it. And it may be a matter of sort of water availability being more of an issue rather than the actual heat. But again, it's an open question and something that maybe we can look at studying. But in terms of mass deaths, I've not observed any, and I've not had any reported to me. I realize that's a very vague answer, but yes, not that we've observed.
Yeah, I've only heard of that actually in Cameroon, but other than that, I haven't heard. I mean, obviously, I know Australia's had some quite hectic issues with mass fatalities, which have been horrendous. But yeah, no, I don't think, even across Southern Africa, not just in Zambia, I've not also luckily yet come across it. But obviously, certainly in Malawi, the temperatures are 20 degrees higher than average at the minute. And so I think climate change is potentially going to be a bit of a problem there. So Luxon has a question saying, is there any certification for one to handle bats? If there's not, are there plans to certify individuals?
Oh, what a broad question. Okay, so some countries in the Western world have formal training for any sort of bat work related activities, whether it is for research purposes or rehab purposes, and each country has their own system for this. Within Zambia, bats are wildlife, so they're classed as wildlife. They are absolutely not pests. So the same approach for any form of wildlife should be taken. Where handling of bats is concerned, there should be some form of research permit for any research activities. For people who are dealing with bats in their homes, Bats should definitely not be handled by the general public at all. You know, it puts people at risks that they don't really fully understand and aren't informed about. So our general advice to the general public is do not handle bats under any circumstances directly. If there's a rescue situation, obviously we will talk through things with people. The Bats in Zambia project has a research permit, and that covers work that we do where we're picking up bats from people's houses because it's a monitoring project. And so handling bats in that case is more of a research situation. We don't have anything in place for a sort of informal rescue scenario. And that's something that we want to work with at the Department of National Parks and Wildlife on. And the snake people in Zambia have the same issue where they're rescuing snakes, which are wildlife, on a short-term basis, which will obviously be returned to the wild. And this is something that we need to deal with. From a research perspective, absolutely, anybody who is handling bats for research purposes has to have a research permit. And the Department of National Parks and Wildlife will require some form of evidence that that person has experience in being able to handle bats. That experience could come from working with our team and being trained up with our team, but obviously could also come from working with other researchers that come in and out of the country. I would advise anybody who's looking at trying to train up to do research on bats that involves handling of bats, that they get in touch with us. And like I said, we're really an important hub for getting people together for training purposes and such like. At some point, maybe we will have an actual certificate that we can help people with. But at the moment, it's more of a recommendation that we can give rather than a sort of training certificate. So what we would really like to do is focus on non-invasive research like the acoustic research, but we're also very well aware that we're not quite at that stage in Zambia where acoustics can be used for every research question, so that handling bats is actually needed in many cases. So another long answer to your question, but I hope that's useful. And if you are interested in handling bats for research purposes, please do get in touch.
Excellent, thank you. And Helen absolutely loves capacity strengthening, and we're always very excited to hear people who would want to work on bats. And as Helen had mentioned, we're very lucky to have Christopher Imakamvo, who's our Bats Without Borders Capacity Development Officer based in Zambia, who is on this call, and also Katendi. So we have two academics based in Zambian institutes as well. And I'm sure that they would be quite keen to get, if you were wanting to go out and get some experience with them, as well as obviously the Bats in Zambia project. So there's quite a lot of really nice opportunities. So the next question is from Mark. So Mark says, I'm based in Cape Town and have had a lifetime fascination with bats, which is lovely. You've definitely in the right place. Is there anywhere in South Africa nearby that you could actually go and get some real life experience, perhaps in a project? Perhaps you have a list of projects you could volunteer just for a few days away. Absolutely incredible. So I see actually Stephanie, who is lovely, has mentioned she's based in Cape Town, but I'm delighted to say before we've just run this year, Bats Without Borders ran a 4-month training course where we trained 32 people across 7 Southern African countries to develop their own bat group. And actually we have a little cluster in Cape Town who are just about to set up their own bat group. So if you want to drop an email to info@batswithoutborders.org, we can certainly put you in touch. But also there could be opportunities if you want to go like to Zambia to see actually Eidolon, the straw-coloured fruit bat migration. You know, there could be other opportunities, and we've got a new student project starting in Malawi. So there's definitely opportunities to get people involved depending on what you want to do. But certainly Cape Town, we've been hoping that a bat group gets started there for some time. So yeah, I don't know, Helen, if you want to say anything about, you know, volunteering and getting involved.
Well, all I was going to say was actually this is a question for you, Rachel. from a Zambian perspective, the same sort of thing applies for anybody else who's interested in, looking at bats or joining us on some of the things that we're doing. Just get in touch and we can give you more advice. But from a South African perspective, definitely Bats Without Borders has a really, really good network in South Africa as well. And dropping the info at line and email would be the best way to go.
So that's fantastic. And also I see it's actually really nice to see so many South Africans on this call as well today, as well as Zambians. And just to say, for those of you who are interested in rugby, there's obviously the rugby game, important rugby game this Saturday. So best of luck to us. But yeah, I just wanted to, we have it. Oh, sorry, we do have another question. I thought, there we go. So, Gangan Deep said, "Hi, Helen. This is Gangan from India. I'm currently a postdoc researcher with research experience in bat biodiversity. During my research period, I also came across with farmers dealing with problems related to fruit bats, destroying their orchards. When the common man is not so happy with the existence of wildlife species nearby their farmlands and households, how do we encourage them to still preserve the species and adopt methods of securing their croplands, which does not cause them to financially invest from their own pockets as well?" That's quite a good question. So I suppose it's kind of how to work with farmers in a way that they aren't losing financially, but also that they're not then killing fruit bats.
Yeah, that's such a big question. And actually someone from a country where there is a bigger issue with fruit bats and crops would be better placed to answer this question. But I suppose taking it from a different perspective, where we have people who, let's say, have a negative attitude towards bats in their houses, but also are not particularly receptive to improving their houses to remove the issue of the bats being able to get into living spaces or within the ceilings. I suppose putting it into a question where we've got these very negative attitudes towards bats that sometimes arise, if it comes with a cost or an inconvenience to people to try to reduce the conflict, how do we address that? How do we persuade people to keep their biodiversity despite the negative outlook? I think this is a general life question that I think that all of us to some extent have to think about. For example, if we get stung by a wasp and we get really angry at that wasp and then want to destroy all of the wasps in the nest that we found, why should we do that? Is there a way of persuading people, even despite the negative issues that we cannot remove, or we're not willing to remove? Are we willing to just cooperate and coexist with wildlife so as to preserve our biodiversity for long-term benefits of people? I think, unfortunately, that will come down to people understanding bats. I realize that there's been this debate about how much impact education activities have and outreach activities have, but I do still think that there's a really important role to be played by educational establishments, especially at primary school, really, really early stages, where there needs to be an appreciation for the natural world instilled in people from a very young age. I think that will be really important, but it will be something that will take time to develop. And when we're talking about conflict specifically with fruit bats and orchards, where it becomes a financial issue, I think we need to be better at communicating science to farmers, but also better at researching solutions that might reduce the impacts that there is on crops, for example. Like I said, that's not an area that I'm really experienced in, and obviously we want to draw on experience from others that do have this as a bigger issue. But and like I said, it'll be something that we have to deal with going forward. So something that we need to think about. Really hard question.
And to be honest, there's some fantastic learning from across Asia. There's an amazing amount of work. We have actually had a couple of talks. So if you want to drop us an email at info@batswithoutborders.org, I'll pop that in the chat just now. But we can certainly send you the links, but also we could connect you with some of the people that we know. But certainly there's been some really amazing work done across Asia. So there'll be, and actually Australia as well. So I think there's been some quite important work done on fruit bats specifically. So yeah, that's great. And so Ahmed has said that he's absolutely intrigued by the discussion. He's a microbiologist graduate based in Bangladesh, where the country is home to 40 plus species, which is fantastic. And he would like to explore that. He's looking for opportunities to work on bat biology before going on to future studies. Is there any contribution to be involved voluntarily to gain some sort of experience? Thank you very much.
Again, I'm going to direct this to the Bats Without Borders umbrella, because I think the opportunities with the Bats in Zambia team would be similar to the whole of Southern Africa, where I suppose Bats Without Borders would be the connecting voice, where you would sort of get in touch and say, I'm very interested in this. Could you put me in touch with somewhere locally that might have an opportunity to gain experience, for example? Yeah, so from a Zambian perspective, like I said, we are involved in working with a lot of different collaborators, and we're hoping that the universities will go forward with much more student projects, and there might be opportunities for some sort of exchange or joining some student projects as well. So I would just urge you just to get in touch with Bats Without Borders directly on the info@ email address, and then they will lead you to the other people that we might have within the wider network that might be able to provide opportunities. Does that answer the question, Rachel? I don't know if you want to add anything there.
Yeah, no, that does. And I think, it's one of the things, obviously, we've presented here what's been happening, obviously in Zambia and Bats Without Borders, we work in just Southern Africa. So I would say there is an incredible network also closer to home. So by all means, drop us an email and we can certainly try and connect you up. But if it's, African experience you're wanting, we can certainly look at some of that. There's also, been some great work done on the conflict as well in Rwanda, and we have had a great talk on that too. So there's quite a lot on our YouTube channel, just to kind of sort of plug the lots of great talks and work around the world. So we've got an email from a message from Dixon saying, would you advise one to start up a bat organization as a project or as an organization? It has to do with monitoring, exploring and engaging communities for bat conservation. I understand how you analyze the Bats Without Zambian project to be a hub.
Yeah, so from our perspective, it flowed this way from project to understanding where we were up to, mainly driven by a need for more information gathering within the country, and that was from a research perspective. So we did several expeditions before moving on to saying, right, we've got a project here where we need to gather more information from a research perspective, and that's why it started as a project. We were in the very, very lucky position that Bats Without Borders existed as an organization. Before I started thinking about the project, I was thinking, well, maybe we need an organization, an NGO in Zambia, and then realized Bats Without Borders was set up as a Southern African organization doing all of the things that I was hoping that we would be able to do from a Zambia perspective. And so we already had an umbrella to get support under. So from a Southern African perspective, Bats Without Borders was already the organization to help with what we were doing. And so it actually worked better to start with a sort of project, review that project over time, and decide whether there would be a need for an organization. Now, in future, we may need an organization that's only Zambia specific. But at the present, in terms of capacity and in terms of our collaborations, we feel that the hub sort of approach of information exchange works much better than jumping into the extra organizational requirements like administration, funds for specific equipment, trying to make sure that people are obviously paid for their work, and making sure that if we have any staffing requirements rather than volunteer requirements, those requirements are met. Like I said, we are in an extremely lucky position to have Bats Without Borders, and who are also now taking on a capacity development officer in the form of Christopher, which is very exciting, and covering those sort of organizational structural needs that the project itself doesn't. So to answer your question, in our context, a project starting off first worked really well. In your specific situation, it may actually work better the other way around, but for us, it worked very, very well to sort of develop what our priorities were first before trying to attempt the extra layers that are needed for an efficient organization to run. I hope that answers your question.
That's fantastic. Thank you very, very much, Helen, for giving us a real overview of all the fantastic work being done in Zambia. And thank you very much for all of you joining us today, and have a great rest of your week. So take care. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.